Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest Flow Learning and Mapal webinar. Thanks very much for choosing to spend a bit of time with us this morning. We're going to be talking about bite-sized learning, what it is, what it's good for, and how you can create great bite-sized learning resources. So let me introduce myself. I'm James McCluckey. I'm currently Chief Learning Officer for Flow. I'm sure a lot of people on here this morning are either for clients or are aware of Flow, but for those who don't, we provide learning solutions and platforms for the hospitality industry. And my lovely team of colleagues and I provide the learning resources element of that. We're part of the wider Mapal group. Mapal is the home of best-in-class hospitality management solutions built for professional and multi-site businesses. I've been working in digital learning for the best part of 15 years. I used to be on the board of the e-learning network, and I'm a judge chair of the Learning Technologies Awards. If you're on Twitter, please do feel free to tweet about the session using the hashtag #FlowWebinar, and please use the chat facility to the right of your screen. It would be great to hear your questions and thoughts as I go through the session. There's nothing worse than just having someone talk at you for 40, 45 minutes. So please do use the chat facility to engage with both with myself and with your fellow attendees. So what are we actually going to cover this morning? Want to find out a little bit about yourselves, so who we have on the session, who you work for, and where you're from. Then we'll talk a little bit about defining what we mean by bite-sized learning. Then what I want to have a short conversation about is how we move our thinking from learning to performance. Then some principles for designing great bite-sized learning. We'll talk about some formats, bite-sized learning types. Then a bit of a debate, hopefully, resources versus courses. And then a little bit of a Q&A. So, we'll have a Q&A at the end. But as I said, if you have any questions, please do feel free to chat them, put them into the chat box. I will check, if there's any questions as we go through the session. So, as I said, it'd be great to find out a little bit about who we've got on the call this morning. So if you could pop in some details in the chat about who you are, where you work, what your role is, or what you'd like to get out this morning, and I'll just give you a minute or two to do that. So I see we have Bethany here, Learning Experience Manager for Flow. Hi, Sam. Nice to see you. Sam from Dishoom. You're going to get a mention later on, Sam. So please don't be embarrassed when I do that towards the end. Hi, Kim. Nice to see you. Okay, so we've got a few people with us this morning, so as I said, please do use the chat as we go through the session itself. So first of all, a question for you guys. How would you define bite-sized learning? So it's a term that's used quite a lot. We hear people mention it often. But what does it mean to you? If I say to you bite-sized, how would you define that? Just to make sure we're all thinking about the same thing. Let's give you a minute or two to come up with your suggestions. Sorry, the reason why my head is turned is because I have the chat to my left-hand side and the actual presentation itself to the right. So apologies for all the head turning going on. So what do we have? Lisa, thank you. Short, sharp learning experience. Gillian, manageable chunks. Thomas, hi, Thomas, nice to see you. 2 minutes maximum, absolutely. Short, sharp, engaging, meaningful learning interactions. Yeah, so I'm hearing the word short and sharp a lot, which is great. It pretty much fits in with my definition. So let me just show you what I mean when I talk about bite-sized learning. So here's a breakdown. I think it has 4 key elements. So I was very glad to see the short word there, because firstly, that's what they are. The clue is on the tin. But really what you're aiming to do is get them as short as possible. It's not for nothing that people also refer to them as micro-learning. To help with that, what you want to make sure is that they're targeted, by which I mean you're clear on your bite-sized resources purpose. So what is it trying to achieve? What do you want people to be able to do as a result of going through it? And to ensure that they are targeted, you want them to focus on a single objective. So this is something that is defined, and the resource serves to meet that purpose, and that helps to give it the purpose that you're looking for. And one final characteristic, and we'll cover this in a bit more detail later on, is they only have the need-to-know information in there. So no fluff, keep it lean so that it's focused on that objective. So what do people think about that as a set of 4 characteristics that define bite-sized learning? Are we all roughly in agreement with it? Hi, Fiona, nice to see you. It's been a while. Okay, so I'm not. Yep, thank you, Lisa. So I'll take that one agreement as broad agreement, and we shall move on to the next section. So again, now your fingers are nice and limbered up. Could you give me some examples of formats or types of bite-sized resources that you've come across? So we're just looking for the actual, formats that you've seen the bite-sized content be delivered in. So just give you a minute or two. So yeah, Fiona, video, absolutely. We've got some people on the call this morning, on the session this morning, that know a lot about that. Yep, infographics as well, Bethany, thank you. Cue cards, that's an interesting one, Katie. Hi, Jill, nice to see you. Yep, infographics, absolutely. So we've got videos, infographics, cue cards. So roughly what I've got down here. So here's some of the formats that I would like you to think about. So it's not an exhaustive list. You guys have come up with 1 or 2 that I don't have here. But some of the main types of resources are video. So, as was mentioned in the chat there. So this is definitely one of the most common bite-sized learning types. Certainly the smartphones getting ever more sophisticated, you can get some really pretty slick looking footage from your device. And videos are often used to capture things like demonstrations. So like cooking demonstrations or drinks demonstrations or talking heads. To basically try to engage subject matter experts sharing their best practice advice. Next are checklists. Now, a lot of people don't think of checklists as a learning resource, but for me, that's exactly what they are. They're really great for walking someone through a process or a procedure. Now, they might not be the sexiest things in the world, but they're really effective, and I'm a big fan. There was actually a book came out a few years ago called The Checklist Manifesto, which was all about trying to embed checklists in the workplace because they're a really great tool for making sure that people go through processes and procedures in a robust way. So I would recommend that you have a look for that. Next up, we have our list of top tips. So again, they're what they say on the tin, really just short, targeted best practice advice. And the format could be anything from simple text or graphics. And I've actually seen some really great examples of this on TikTok. So someone has a top tip, for example, on how to make a cocktail or a coffee better. They film that tip and they share it on social media. A really quick, easy way to get some really great learning points across. Infographics were mentioned a few times there, and obviously they're becoming increasingly popular. So essentially, I'm sure everyone's familiar with what they are, but they're a graphical representation of information, often facts, figures, or a process, but represented with images and icons. And again, they're a great way of running through a process in a visually impactful way. And speaking of visual impact, animations is something that we at Flow have been using quite a lot recently. They're a great way of getting a lot of information across in a really creative way. Now, obviously, it can get very expensive, but there are loads of tools around that are free or inexpensive, such as Vyond or Powtoon, which means you don't have to break the bank to create them. So if you just Google free animation tools, you'll see that you have various options there. And just finally, we've got some how-to guides. So basically step-by-step walkthroughs of a particular task, such as how to deal with a difficult guest, how to safely lock up a venue, how to create a Christmas menu. The format, again, could be just text, but you could also make use of some of the formats you see on screen, such as video, animations, or infographics. So it's not an exhaustive list, as I said, but it gives you a good idea what a bite-sized learning resource could look like. And if you do have experience of creating bite-sized learning resources, please, again, do feel free to share them in the chat. It's not just the benefit of my experience we're looking for here, it's for all yours as well. So if you have any of your own top tips, please do share them with your fellow delegates this morning. So before we go any further, though, I just want to touch on the distinction between learning and performance. So we'll talk a bit later on about courses versus resources, because it's relevant to this idea of moving our thinking from learning to performance. So I'm going to be speaking very blunt, very, very crude tones here, but learning typically focuses on knowledge and understanding. So to know a process, to understand when to use something. And performance is the next stage to that. So how does that knowledge and understanding actually manifest itself into our daily practice and into our workplaces? So quite simply, it's what do we do with that knowledge and understanding? So do we use it to plan something? Do we use it to implement something? Just to describe something? And that's what all good bite-sized learning focuses on. It focuses on the practical application of that information. So essentially, you might have heard the term performance support, job aids, things like that. So essentially what effective bite-sized learning does is it could be thought of as performance support. So what do I mean by performance support? So it's a point of need or a just-in-time tool or resource that provides instruction to help with a task, activity, or a challenge. So it's very clear on its purpose, and it's available when your learners need it in a format that they can access easily. And this statement here is a really good one to have in your mind when you're developing bite-sized content, because it really does help to focus your efforts and ensure that what you're developing does have genuine purpose and will have impact when you launch it to the business. So just to break things up a little bit, during the session, I'm going to pose a couple of questions for you guys to consider. I'm going to ask you to be judge. There's a couple of statements that I've often seen debated when there's been discussions on bite-sized learning. So what I'm going to do is present an argument and let you guys debate it. And the first one is this. So good aesthetic, spelling fail there. Good aesthetic design is a crucial consideration when creating bite-sized learning resources. So the argument on this one goes that it doesn't matter. One side says the design doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it looks like because the power is in the instruction, the power is in the information. However, the counter argument is that with all the tools now available to create good-looking resources, a resource could get lost amongst those that have made the effort to present a good-looking public face. So what do you guys think? I'll just give you a minute or two to put your thoughts actually into the chat. So does it matter about aesthetic design? And I'll give you my opinion after you guys have had a chance to put yours in. Okay, Fiona, 50-50, okay. Nice fence sitting there, Fiona. Yeah, Amanda needs to be eye-catching and engaging for the learner. Yep. I think that goes what I was saying, but some of the counter argument is if it's not, if it doesn't have that, there's a chance it could get lost, or people perhaps don't take it seriously. Okay, Iker, that's a very that's a very practical response to it. Consumers of bite-sized learning are practical and won't pay special attention to the design. Thanks, Katie and Patricia. Yep, that's grand. Yep, lovely. Okay, so I'm actually in agreement with Katie and Fiona, and then obviously Patricia now as well. So I think it depends on the resource. So obviously things like the design, things that are graphics and animations or videos can be quite unforgiving mediums. And video as well, sound's obviously important. So I think, yeah, it very much depends on what the resource is and actually what it sits amongst. So if it's amongst a lot of very well presented, very well created resources, and yours doesn't have that, then there is a chance that people might overlook it. However, I would always argue the information is the key thing. So you're using the design elements to actually bring out the information in a way, not just to say good design is happening here, because without that information embedded, basically at scaffolding the resource, then the good design might look pretty, but it's not actually going to help people to do something, which obviously is the intention of any kind of resource. So let's now take a look at some core design. Thank you, by the way, everyone, for engaging with that. It was great to see the chat so busy there. So let's now get back to looking at some core design principles that you should use, regardless of the type of resource that you're going to develop. And actually, I'm sure you'll agree that most of these are just plain old common sense. But if you have any comment on them at all as I'm going through them, please do share it with me. So I touched on this before, but I won't labour the point too much here, but focus on performance outcomes. So have it front and centre of your mind when you're putting your resource together. So what do you want something to be able to do as a result of consuming the content? So do you want them to articulate? You want to articulate this using action verbs. So things like describe, plan, list, implement, build, make, etc. So really clear, tangible actions. So what is the impact or the change that you want to see in the workplace? And the reason why I'm labouring this point is because a lot of people, they might talk about learning outcomes when they're putting together a formal workshop or an e-learning course, but it quite often gets missed when it comes to the short bite-sized learning pieces. So in a previous role, we spent a lot of time doing a lot of animated content. So we would come up with the most creative ideas, some really engaging, some scenarios. However, when you got to the end of it, there was a bit of a so what? What am I supposed to do with this? So we reframed how we actually constructed those animations, and we always started off with the outcome. So what does someone have to do by the end of this? So do they have to have a difficult conversation? Do they have to do a rota or whatever? Have that front and center of your mind when you're putting together your resource. This is really important to think about. Put yourself in the position of learners, and it's something that we often forget to think about. But for me, this is about thinking about the wide range of considerations that your learners will face. So is it really addressing their performance gap? Is the choice of resource format right? So by which I mean, you might spend a lot of time producing a great looking video, but is it the right thing to provide them with when a simple checklist would achieve the performance outcome for them better? Do they have the time to watch a video actually when they're dealing with guests? So would it be better to have an infographic somewhere where they can see it and remember it? Would that work better because it's visually appealing and they don't have to take time away to actually get the learning points from that resource? So it really is all about thinking this through from every perspective to ensure that the tool will do its job. Again, provide clear instructions or action points. Very obvious, but it's amazing how many resources actually aren't that clear. There's various reasons for this. Sometimes it's because the resource has been created by a subject matter expert, so there's a lot of assumed knowledge there. So think about your structure. If it's a task-focused resource, make sure everything is covered to help someone actually complete the task. And sometimes it's actually helpful to provide a worked example that illustrates what needs to be done. So give them the tool by all means, but then provide them with an example of how it actually is implemented, so they're absolutely clear on how they should be using the tool. Again, road test your resource. Now, again, this is important, but something that's missed, and it's very, very closely linked to the last 2 points. So, the last 2 points were, is your resource clear enough and does it work for learners? So get your resource in front of your audience before you launch it. Is it fit for purpose? How are learners responding to it? But because these resources are bite-sized, some people think it doesn't matter. You don't have to road test them. But actually, it could make the difference between someone doing something right or doing something badly. So get some opinions on it before you actually release it to your learners. The fifth of the 6th point is Cull, non-essential information. So remember, we're trying to keep these lean. Think of the keywords, bite-sized, micro. If something isn't necessary for your learners to do, then the information shouldn't go in. So, it shouldn't go into any learning solution, but it certainly shouldn't go into a bite-sized one if it's not important that learners actually know it in order to perform the task that you're asking them to do. Sometimes we include information which is just nice to know, but actually often that is just noise or it's traffic. If it's not essential, certainly in bite-sized resources, it shouldn't go in there. And your road testing will help with that. If someone's skipping past something, or you can see they didn't actually need to have that piece of information or data in order to complete the task, or impact the change, then you can remove that. And just one final one, don't send learners on a treasure hunt. Does anyone have any idea what I mean by that? Been a little bit facetious there with the term, but does anyone have any kind of thoughts about what I'm actually talking about there? Just give you a minute or two. I'm just reading through the previous comments. Oh, thanks for the love, Bethany. That's much appreciated. Okay, you've either gone shy or yeah, thank you, Bethany. It's just popped through. So they need to be able to find it easily. Absolutely. So yeah, they've got to be able to find it. There's no point creating this marvelous resource if learners can't actually access it. So make sure it's available when they need it, not buried 10 pages deep in an intranet or an LMS. The name of the resource is also really important. So, especially for bite-sized things, try not to get too creative. Now, I hate myself for saying that because I do embrace creativity and try and encourage it. But when it comes to bite-sized learning, the title really has to help people understand what it is they're meant to be doing as a result of going through it. So if it's about how to make a great dry martini, call it how to make a great dry martini, or making a great dry martini, not something so abstract that people miss what it's actually about. So here's the summary of the bite-sized resource design top tips. Focus on a performance outcome. If anyone's got any comments on these, incidentally, as I'm putting them up, or any comments about them as a collective set of principles, again, we'd be delighted to hear it. So focus on a performance outcome. Put yourself in the position of learners. Provide clear action points and instructions. Road test your resource. Cull non-essential information, and don't send learners on a treasure hunt. So any thoughts on those? Let's wait for the chat to come through. Okay. Again, I'll take the silence as acceptance, and I'll move on to the next part. So I'm going to ask you guys to play judge again. Thanks, Gillian. Only giving snippets of info and leaving us to try to figure out the rest. Okay, grand. Thanks, Fiona. Thanks for the recap there. So yeah, I'm going to ask you guys to be judge again. So your people are your best bite-sized learning resource. So the argument here goes that the people in your business are the most effective nuggets of information. So they're the ones doing the job. They know the organization, and they have the wisdom and the tacit knowledge that you can exploit or use to create great content. But to counter that, what others say is that if you use the people in the business and their tacit knowledge, then the information could be inconsistent. And of course, people themselves aren't scalable. So there's some argument to be said that that people aren't the best bite-sized learning resource. So I'd be curious to hear what others think about that. So you decide. So Sam, you're making a very good point there. Ask learners what they would like to see, what they want or need to learn. That's interesting for the IT help desk. That's exactly what I was thinking about when I first read that statement. Are people talking about having people on a help desk? And then I kind of took the concept further to actually using them to create the resources. And Katie, that's a good point about, you know, the parameters to make sure the information is consistent. I'd be curious to know what people thought about that, the consistency thing. So if it's, obviously if it's a standard organizational message, I think that is important. You know, if there's a way to do something, but obviously, you know, we're quite flexible. We all have our different ways of working. You know, so it's interesting. That's an interesting concept in terms of, as long as you get the task done and it's done well, does that consistency matter? So I think there's an argument, a counter argument to be made there. So Amanda, as long as it's the right person, yes, I'd say that's probably quite important that they have something to say and or wisdom to impart, and it's the right, you know, it's helpful, I guess, the best way of thinking about it. Thomas, team members on the floor can highlight what resources are needed, but content experts can help. Yes, I would agree, Thomas. So I think it's about, you know, that's the age-old thing, isn't it? Like, you know, learning and development, content creators, resource creators, working with subject matter experts to make sure that that information is compiled and then presented in a way that actually is helpful to colleagues and team members. Yeah, and I think that goes back to GM, what Thomas was saying there, that the people themselves, they know the best way of doing things. But, you know, it's about, as I said, appropriating that information so that it's presented in the most helpful way. It goes back to that thing, I think, when somebody asks you to demonstrate, how do you do that on your computer or your laptop or your phone? And because you do it so tacitly, you actually have to stop yourself and think about how you do it. So I think it's about, you know, taking that a stage further, is getting that the things that are in the bones and the DNA of the experts and presenting it in such a way that then becomes a useful learning tool for others to make use of. So thanks for that engagement there, guys. Just to say, I think my machine's running probably about 10-20 seconds behind everyone else's. So apologies if there is some gaps before I you know, pick up what you're typing there. So I'm refreshing my chat to make sure it comes through in real time. So just apologies if there's been a couple of quiet patches. So I've got another question for you. I'm curious to know what kind of questions you ask the business to make sure that your learning solutions are adding value. So, you know, how do you start? So you're hopefully you're going to feel inspired after this to go off and produce a big bank of bite-sized learning resources. But how would you begin that process? So what questions would you ask your stakeholders? Again, I'll give you a minute or two to put that in. Obviously, I have my own opinions on this, so I will share them once I've heard from a couple of other people. Patricia, thank you. How does it work best for you? Okay, so I'm assuming you're talking about a specific resource there. Okay, so let me tell you what you shouldn't ask. Well, let them not tell you, sorry, how crass. Let me advise you what you shouldn't ask. The one thing I hope you don't ask is, what training would you like? Because training is what you do to dogs. It's not what you do to humans. And if you ask that question, you'll often just get vague responses or a list of things that people think they want rather than what they actually need. So it's much better to ask the following questions. What problems do you need to solve? What challenges do you need to overcome? What do your colleagues need to know? These will unearth much richer information that you can actually do something with. So you can reframe those problems and challenges into the action-focused performance statements that you can then actually use to start your resource development process. So if the business is telling you that a certain bottle of wine is not selling, you could create a resource focused on pairing that bottle of wine with lunch menu items. So something practical that people could start using. Got a few more responses come through here. So what's changed after the learning? Okay. If you provided learning on time recording, has the WIP increased? Yep, that's all good. Sam, why is this resource better than another? I think that's probably quite that comparison thing. What's working well, and then ensuring that you take what's working well and then applying that to other learning design. Austin, what can we do to improve the situations? How can we help? Yeah, I think that's probably, thank you. That's probably the same as what I was thinking, but you just said it in a different way. So, but I think we're both coming from the same place there, Austin. I just want to show you a couple of things. These are examples of performance support resources that I have seen in the past, or I've given some approximations of them. So what do you think about this one? So this is obviously a text-based resource. It is about project review meetings, and it's basically trying to impart people some tips on how to some tips on how to actually run a project review meeting. So some thoughts on that would be appreciated. Okay, so my own thoughts, I'm sure it's mirrored by a few of you here. My own thoughts are obviously, it's just a big wall of text. The information might be great, but it's so hard to pick it out. It's actually working against the learner. Some comments are starting to come through now. So Katie, it's wordy, it's telling, it's not specific enough. Yikes, yes, Fiona, I thought that might be most people's reaction to it. I'm specifically interested in the title though. So obviously I think everyone would agree that it is just a big wall of text, and the information might be fantastic, but where would you find it? How would you know it's in there? Because there's nothing that helps it to stand out. The title is, I think, is really vague. It doesn't actually tell you what someone's supposed to be able to do as a result of this. Review meetings, so what about them? So tell me a bit more about what I'm supposed to get from this resource. And that I think is really key when it comes to bite-sized learning. As I said before, the titles are really important. If you can set that context using the title, this is what someone's meant to get from a resource or supposed to be able to do from it. It really does help people to get through the resource quickly, and they have that knowledge of, okay, this. I'm working towards something. So your title is really important. So is this better, do you think? Again, I'll give you a few seconds to reply to that. Yeah, I'm watching myself on the little the chat thing here. So we're probably running, you guys are probably running about 10 seconds behind me when it comes to the broadcast. So that'll explain some of the pauses, sorry. But it's 10 seconds, it means I can have a glug of coffee or a glug of water, so that's an interesting point, Fiona, about it could be relayed in a couple of sentences. From the previous slide, I think you're right there. I think brevity, obviously, and that's actually quite a skill, is writing in a way that you still get the information across, and it's you don't lose any learning points. So writing, editing in such a way that you're writing, the content that it still has meaning and still helpful, but doing it in such a way that you're not writing like long sentences or run-on sentences. And I think that's quite important as well, especially in hospitality, because obviously a lot of our colleagues and team members, English isn't their native language. So it's really key that you write in such a way that things are clear and straightforward, but still in a way that it is quite engaging. I mean, so I think this is better, obviously. Thanks, Katie. Yep, a lot better text split, key points and graphics, absolutely. So yes, I mean, it's there's much more structure there. The use of bold text and use of boxes help us to get to the essential information quickly. The graphic is something I would argue against this time. So it's a picture of a man running. It's the classic example of what we do with the photograph, sorry, not the graphic. I assume by graphic, Katie, you're probably meaning the process 1, 2, 3 towards the bottom of the page there. But I think the graphic at the top is, certainly when I first started putting e-learning together, I would fall into the habit of putting graphics there for the sake of it, photographs there for the sake of it, thinking I was being clever, but actually they are just a distraction. It doesn't actually relate to the content. So if you're going to be having, kind of icons there, graphics, photographs, etc., make sure they actually are there to reinforce the learning points or actually provide the learning points, not just there because there's a bit of white space to fill. So I would say that this is taking it a stage further. This is this is the best version of that. It's got the title there. It does what it says on the tin. It's very nicely spaced out. Obviously, from a design perspective, it could look a lot better. But in terms of information structure, you've got it all there in terms of the process is nicely laid out. It sets up the learning points. It's got makes use of bullets and bold text, so you can scan through it quickly and get the key information there. And if design's important, you could take this document, so it looks like it was a Word document, and get some designers to give it a bit of a flourish, and then it would be fit for purpose, hopefully. So let's go on to video now. So this is a talking head video that was produced. Right, we've got Thomas, Sam, and Austin from Deshuma on the call, and so I'm going to mention those guys later on, give them a bit of a plug. But is there anything that immediately strikes you about this video? There's one thing that's very telling for me. So Fiona, you've got, it's not very creative or funky, it looks old-fashioned. So I'm not sure if you're talking about the video or the previous document, the how to run a project review meeting document, but you can let me know. I'm guessing it would probably apply to either. Fiona, you're very much on a road to nowhere then, yeah? Sorry, that was just a crap pun from me. Yeah. I'll pass that on to Brent, Thomas, that you're a big fan of his tie. So the main thing for me, and actually possibly it's very difficult for you guys to see this. So yeah, the tie is proving very controversial. Yeah, probably you guys can't see this. It's 47 minutes, 28 seconds. which is far too long for any video, I would argue, especially if it's just someone talking. As fascinating as I like to think I am, for example, there's a reason why I'm trying to encourage you guys to engage in the chat. It's because it's very difficult just to sit and listen to someone speak for that length of time without some kind of engagement or without some kind of cues to reflect back. So in terms of video, obviously 47 minutes, regardless if it's considered to be bite-sized or not, is just far too long. And yeah, the backdrop is a very good point, actually. It can be distracting if you have something there that takes away from what a person is saying. But so that's definitely something you have to have a think about. The setting is going to actually not take away from what you want people to focus on. A good point for video though is so this one obviously has a different version. It's been chopped down. Still 356 is probably still a bit too long for bite size. You're probably looking for no more than 2 minutes, less if you can. But what we've got here is a shorter video. Sorry, the background and the tie are still there. The pale face is still there. Haven't done anything about those things. But yeah, what to think about doing when you're doing video is use things like graphics, text, indents, cutaways to reinforce what the person's saying. So if they start to list a process or they talk about a certain situation, is perhaps try and represent that on screen in some way. So that could be text or it could be cutaway footage. So if you're talking about a particular scenario in a restaurant, then you could perhaps reconstruct that or film it happening live, film it happening as it happens, and then cut that in to the video. So there's all sorts of options there that you have to try and make the videos more engaging on that. Let me just see if there's any extra comments. Okay. So just a couple of final points I want to make. A good bite-sized resource is like a ninja. You almost don't know it's there. It's a help resource for you. So it's almost like if you've got a problem to solve or a challenge to overcome, or you're not sure how to do something, or you're aware that you should know something and be able to implement that knowledge, a good bite-sized resource should be like a helpful friend. It should just appear almost by stealth. You're not aware that you're learning necessarily because the application you're already focusing on the application of what the resource is trying to tell you. So that's why I use the ninja analogy. It just appears and it serves a very clear, direct purpose for that. So I want to move on to talk a little bit about resources versus courses, because obviously this is something there's been a bit of debate about this when it comes to learning and development professionals. I've been in L&D for about 15 years now. Actually longer than that. Digital learning for 15 years, and L&D generally about 18 to 20 years. And when we first started thinking about these ideas of bite-sized learning and resources, it was almost like an affront to a lot of people, myself included, because that's what we do. We run courses, we run workshops, and someone has to spend at least a day with us in order to get all the advice and best practice guidance that they need in order to go back to the workplace, just to forget it all as soon as they need it. So I'd be interested in any thoughts that people have about resources versus courses. When would you use one over the other? And as I said, because I'm running about 10 seconds ahead of you guys, there might be a bit of dead space here, but I would be really interested to hear what you have to think about that debate, because it has been going on for a while. So I'll just give you a minute or two to. I'm just reading just now all the chat about poor Brent. I hope you're not watching Brent. Brent from the video. That's good. Yeah, Fiona, you do a lot of video content, don't you? So you say you're aiming for 60 seconds with bite size, and it's not easy to do. Yeah. I think when it comes to video, quite often people have got a story to tell. That's why you're recording them, and you've got to get them to do it a few times in order so they're really slick about what they're saying. That's a nice strapline, Sam. Courses to learn and resources to remind. So that feels very much like the kind of whole blended experience then. And I guess you could flip that on its head is resources to set up what they're going to learn in a course, to get them thinking about something, and then you pick it into more detail when you actually do the course itself. Right. I'm conscious of time, so I will move on. So 3 points for me on this. As I said before, resources really are there to support point of need learning. So someone has to be able to do something, or you want them to be able to do something, get to it as quick as you can. Courses are probably more useful when a breadth of knowledge is needed. So I'm thinking, for example, when I started in a financial institution, I was expected to go on the telephone. It was and answer calls about mortgages and savings accounts, etc. There's no way I could just read a quick guide and then go on to the telephone. I had to learn telephone techniques, information in order to have a chance at being successful in that role. So there's definitely a place, there's definitely a time when courses are definitely more appropriate, I would say. And then that goes back to Sam's point that if I forgot something about the mortgage or the savings account, a job aid could be there to help me to get that information. And actually, courses could just be a series of resources. One of the things we're doing at Flow at the moment is what we're trying to do is construct all the different elements of a course that we build could be standalone. So the animations that we produce, the scenarios that we build, the branch scenarios that we build, you don't necessarily have to have gone through the rest of the learning experience to get something out of those individually. You could put all those together as a course, but again, equally they could be standalone. So which is a bit of a kind of like set dressing before and after to make sure it feels like a cohesive learning experience. But yeah, I think definitely courses themselves could be just a series of resources put together to basically fulfill a learning or performance outcome. See if we get any more comments. Yeah, Amanda, that's a very good point. Courses are more of a luxury these days. So yeah, I mean, I think everyone's time poor. I think it's definitely flipped in that, I remember when I first started in learning and development, if you didn't create a course that was a day long, people didn't think there was any merit in it. They thought, well, it's just fluff. What do you mean a 1 hour session? And it's really quite interesting to pick back to see when that flipped over. That if you did say to someone, I'm taking people out of the business for a day, everyone instantly thinks about, the efficiencies there or lack thereof, and definitely question it. And I think that's probably quite healthy. Does anyone have any questions? That's the end of the main session. As I said, because there's a little bit of a time delay, I'll just go on to the next slide here, and then we'll go back to questions. So there's a couple of things I just want to point out. We've done a series of webinars now with Flo and Mopal about learning design. There's two in particular that I'd like to draw your attention to. One is it features some of our attendees today, Sam, Austin, and Thomas from Dishoom. We did a webinar together a few weeks ago about video production. Which I think would be really useful. Anyone here who's interested in creating videos would get a lot from that session. The guys at Dishoom have been creating some fantastic video content, and using things like smartphones and using their locations. So there's a lot of really great tips in there from those guys because they've been doing it for a long time, and you can get the benefit of their wisdom. There's also a content curation webinar that my colleague Bethany did last week or the week before with Kata from Filtered. So the argument goes is that, why would you create a whole suite of bite-sized resources when actually there's a lot of great content out there that you can actually curate. So rather than starting to create a suite, the perfect resources for you might be out there already. So go off and try and find them with a good curation tool. And just to flag, we're actually adding some new functionality to the Flow platform very, very soon, which will allow our clients to basically upload their own bite-sized resources. So PDFs, videos, audio files, graphic files. So if you are inspired or thinking about creating some bite-sized content, then you'll be able to use the Flow platform to get those out to your learners. Thank you, ZB. So the links to those two videos are actually, those two sessions are actually in the chat, which is great. So if there's no questions, I can't see any coming through. Listen, thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. So it's been really great to see some familiar faces there and some new faces. Thank you so much. Please do keep in touch. I'm on Twitter quite regularly, so at James McCluckey, or by all means send me a LinkedIn friend request. Connect request. It's not Facebook. Yeah, please do get in touch. It'd be really great to hear from you and to swap some stories about how things are going in your organisations. But it just remains for me to say thank you all for joining me this morning and have a great day. Okay, take care now.